So let's look at some priority sequencing. As we said, a statement having multiple operators is evaluated based on the priority of operators. So, just a quick refresher. The operator precedence is parentheses, then multiplication and division, then subtraction and addition, then the not, then the and, then the or. This is most important to least important, meaning or is the least important. So, if we looked at priority chaining, what we would see here is that state and gender from customers, where gender is female and state is Oregon, or gender is female and state is New York, means that, well, we have two filters going on here. One, gender female from Oregon. Two, gender female from New York. So two separate filters are going on here. Conceptually, that I will say. In our mind, we should view it as two separate filters. So on the one hand, we're filtering out all the females from Oregon, and on the other hand, we're filtering out all the females from New York. And why should we conceptually view that as two separate filters? Well, that's the way we wrote it. We split on the or. And then we can read it based on, well, it's this or it's this. That doesn't mean that the database management software is going to execute the query like this. That may be unoptimal. That may not be fast enough. The database management software does optimizations behind the scenes on queries. But for all intents and purposes, what we are trying to get here is a mental model. We are trying to look at a query and say, okay, how do I read this? And how do I read this filter? And how should I look at it in my mind? Even though the database management software may optimize it in different ways, how do I break it down for me? So let's look at another example. Let's say we selected state and gender from customers, where the gender is female and the state is Oregon or the state is New York with parentheses. Okay, how would we break this down into a mental model? Well, we would look at it a little bit like this. We would say, 1, select me everyone from Oregon. 2, select me everyone from New York. And then 3, filter out all of the females. I know you're asking yourself, Mo, why is this so much different than the previous one? Well, the way we would read a query like this is, because of the parentheses, we can now consider it to be one action. We don't have to look at it as two separate filters. Rather, we could look at it as one filter doing two things, because we know that we are filtering if you're from Oregon or you're from New York. And then we're tacking on the ability to filter on gender, because we know that we can read this as, well, it's either this or this, and for both of them, this. So that's why we read it as 1, filter everyone from Oregon, 2, from New York, and 3, filter out the females. So then we get into directionality. We said if the operators have equal precedence, then the operators are evaluated directionally, meaning from left to right or right to left. And we looked at the difference between and, or, and not, and or being left and not looking to the right of itself. And so how would we read queries that are written like that? Well, if we said we had a where clause where we said age has to be larger than 20, and the salary has to be larger than 1,000, and the gender has to be female, and you're not from the state of New York. Well, how would we read that query? Well, because of the directionality and because of the priority, we can say, well, not was more important than and, right? Okay. If not's more important than and, then we know it's going to execute first. And then we said, well, and reads to the left of itself, so it's going to chain up. And the not reads to the right of itself, so it's going to say not state equal to New York. So it's going to invert state equal to New York to be the opposite of what it would originally mean if we didn't put the not keyword there, meaning you have to be from New York. Well, it's doing the opposite of that, saying you don't have to be from New York. So how would we read that? Well, we would say, okay, based on priority, first we're going to say, well, you weren't from New York, so we're going to filter that out. Then we're going to say you were older than 20, your salary is larger than 1,000, and your gender is female. So what if we did this? And we added the parentheses here, and we said age between 20 and 30, so 21 to 29. The age is between 21 and 29. We want to know if you have a salary larger than 1,000, and you're not from New York or you're not from Oregon. So how would this execute? Well, knowing that the parentheses are the most important, and then that the not is the second most important, then the and being the third most important, and the or being the least important, well, how would this execute? Well, because of the parentheses, we would look at it this way. For everyone between the age of 21 and 29, not from New York, not from Oregon, give me the ones that have a salary larger than 1,000. And that's how we would read that where statement, that filter statement. Okay, one more. Let's say you had this. Age larger than 20 years old or age below 30 and the salary larger than 1,000 and not from the state of New York and not from the state of Oregon. Well, what would happen here? Because we lost the parentheses, right? So how would we read this? What's going to happen? Well, I'll tell you. We're going to have two filters going on. Filter one is going to say, well, if you're younger than 30 and you're not from New York and you're not from Oregon and you have a salary larger than 1,000, then I'm going to give you back results. And then filter two is going to say, well, if you're older than 20 in general, I'm going to return you. And so those two streams are going to merge and you're going to get results back from both. So there's two distinct filters going on here. And you may be asking yourself, okay, why, Mo? Well, because we removed the parentheses, we can now view this or statement as a clear separator between what's going to happen here and what's going to happen here. And because it has of least importance, it's going to be fired last. That's why we view this as, quote unquote, a second filter, if we were looking at it based on priority. But we have that clear separation between, well, this is going to fire all of this together with it, and this is just going solo. So this would ruin a result set. Let's say you were trying to get everyone younger than 30, not from New York, not from Oregon, with a salary larger of 1,000. Well, this filter is just going to suddenly populate a whole bunch of people that are just older than 20, not taking into account any of these filters, right? And so what if we said, okay, age larger than 20, or age lower than 30, or salary larger than 1,000? Well, there is no concrete outcome here. We're saying, well, you're either older than 20, or you're younger than 30, or your salary is over 1,000. So we have three distinct filters going on here. So the result set isn't going to tell you very much concrete information unless that's what you were looking for. You're just looking for anyone that's younger than 30 or older than 20 or has a salary of that amount, right? So the mental model here is to look at them as separate. But when there's parentheses around ors, it changes the context. I can hear you saying, okay, Mo, I get it. But like, what if it becomes really complicated? Well, that's when we get into priority and direction. Here I wrote down an example query where we can see I used multiple parentheses, nested parentheses even, and multiple logical operators. And so you may be looking at this being like, what is happening here? We'll break it down line by line, don't worry. So, first of all, we have an outer parentheses. Okay, that means this is the most priority. This is of the highest priority. So everything in here is going to be executed first. All right, so let's go look in here because this is the highest priority. And if you had two levels of top level parentheses, it depends on how they were chained. So because this is the leftmost statement with the top level parentheses, well, we're looking for people that have a salary larger than 10,000 and are from the state of New York. Or they are between the age groups of 20 and 30, so 21 to 29, and they have a salary of less than or equal to 20,000. And then we tack on at the end and we say, well, they also have to be female. anything from this result set also has to be female. So we're looking for all of the females that have a salary of over 10,000 from the state of New York, or are between the ages of 21 and 29 and have a salary of lower than or equal to 20,000. So how does this work in terms of a filter? Well, there's two filters going on here. First, we will filter the salary of larger than 1,000 from New York, female. And then we can look at it as a second filter within, where we're saying, okay, between the ages of 21 and 29, if you have a salary lower than or equal to 20,000 and you are female. So we can break down that query. You see, we did have the parentheses. We even had nested parentheses. But we can still break on that or. But we have to look and take into account the highest level next logical operator, which is the AND, that is filtering on both result sets of whatever comes out of here. So, to summarize again, what we're saying here is we're filtering out everyone with a salary over 10,000 from New York, that is female, or anyone between the ages of 21 and 29 with a salary lower than or equal to 20,000, that is also female. Now feel free to pause the video here, take a look at the query, take a look at the filters, and let it really sink in. All right, so let's go look into some more ways of filtering.